The devil is after Christian homes. That's why that section on the Satan is immediately after the Christian home. So please remember this sandwich. On one side, be filled with the Spirit, family life, and then the attacks of Satan. And so you as a head of the home have to seek to live a spirit-filled life, lead your wife to a spirit-filled life, and lead your children slowly to a spirit-filled life by your example. And all the time, stand against the schemes of the devil. And he's got various ways of coming in. Let me show you something in Proverbs. What function does a woman have in the home? Let me show you a verse in Proverbs 14 and verse 1. You read this? It's pretty humbling for husbands. It's not the man who builds the home. A wise woman builds her home. Proverbs 14 and verse 1. How's that? Isn't it the man who's supposed to build a home? Proverbs is one of the closest books to the New Testament in the Old Testament. Most of the Old Testament books are Old Testament. But Proverbs has got so many, God gives His grace to the humble. It was originally in Proverbs. Okay. The wise woman builds her house. I'll tell you why. The greatest thing that Jesus manifested on earth was total submission to the Father. And we are taught to submit to Him like He submitted to the Father. And in a home, children growing up, where are they going to see that spirit of submission? In the wife. Submitting to her husband. She builds her home by that spirit. And where a wife will not submit to her husband, she destroys her home. The wise woman builds her house. The foolish tears it down with her own hands, telling her husband, I've also got a right, don't just try to boss me. Who do you think you are? Aha. He's tearing down her own home with her hands. It's God who made man and woman. And it's He who has said, wives, submit to your husbands. Turn back to Genesis in chapter 1. When God wanted to manifest His image in humanity, He could not do it with a man. When He said, let us make man in our image, Genesis 1. That was His thought. Let us, Genesis 1:20 says, make man in our image and let them have authority. Isn't that bad English? Let us, that's okay, there's a Trinity there, so us is okay. 3 persons in God. Make man in our image, and it should be, let him rule. No, let them rule. How's that? It's not bad English, I'll tell you. Because when He thought of making man, He thought of making his helpmeet as well, who was one flesh with him, woman. Be careful, every word of Scripture is inspired. Let us make man and let them. You say, Lord, who are the them? Yeah, I'll show you the other part of man. It says woman. Let them rule. And if you don't accept your wife as your partner, you're not going to be ruling. So when God made woman, He said, this is what He said in Genesis 2 verse 18. It is not good for man to be alone. I want to say to all husbands, it's not good for you. You can say you're married, but if you don't have fellowship with your wife at home, you're alone. Do you have fellowship with your wife, or do you just give orders in your house? Do you have fellowship? 2 fellows in one ship, working together? That's true Christianity. Let us make man and let them rule. Let them rule over the devil in their home. Let them guide their children. I will make him a helper suitable for him. Suitable for him. And that means that Adam needed a helper. This great mighty man of God who could give names to all the animals. Have you tried to try and remember the names of 30 animals itself is tough. But imagine giving names. It says he named all the animals. Verse 20, all the cattle and the birds. And by the time he came to the 1,000th one, he still had to remember what is all the names I've given. I can't repeat it again. He had a fantastic mind to remember all that. But it all went away when he sinned. And this is the man who could give names to all the animals. Such a brilliant man. God says he needs a helper. None of us is so brilliant to name all the animals. By the time we come to number 30, we'll forget. What are the first 30? You need a helper. Your wife is supposed to be your helper. It's almost as though God was saying, Adam will never make it unless he gets a wife. He needs a helper. He needs a support. I want to tell you, husbands, you won't make it if you don't have your wife. If God's called you to married life, you won't make it. A major part of what I am in my ministry is because of Annie, my wife. God gave me a helper, exactly suited for me. I don't doubt it, and 54 years of our happy married life has proved it, that she's a helper suitable for me. I didn't rush into marriage. I didn't seek for money or anything. For me, she was the most beautiful woman in the world when I saw her, and she still is. But it was not that. It was a spiritual beauty that directed me then and even now. God wants, look at your wife as a helper. God's saying, you can't make it, my son, without her help. Do you husbands look at your wives like that? You hear God saying to you, you can't make it, my son. You're very clever, very capable, very gifted, but you just can't make it without her. That's not to get the wives all puffed up and to go home and say, did you hear what Brother Zach said? You'll never be a helper if you go with that attitude. The greatest characteristic of Jesus Christ is humility. And you'll never be a helper to your wife, to your husband rather, if you don't have the humility of Christ, who submitted to Joseph and Mary, imperfect earthly parents. The father told him, submit. Is your husband imperfect, dear sister? Think of Jesus living 30 years in submission to an imperfect Joseph and Mary. It says in Luke chapter 2, he submitted to them. It's an example for all wives who have imperfect husbands.